Well, they're a propaganda network.
Yeah.
I mean, that's really all they are. They're just a propaganda network. And I used to think they were the news. And I think at one point in time they were the news. And I think somewhere along the line, when pharmaceutical drug companies started spending so much money, I mean, you've seen all those clips, brought to you by Pfizer, Anderson Cooper, brought to you by Pfizer. There is no way they can be honest. There's no way. If you're accepting money from the very people that you now have to hold criminally liable, and they have been criminally liable. I mean, they have the highest criminal fines of any companies ever for crimes like what they've done, lies, covering up evidence, and they just pay a fine and go back to work. And that's what's wild about it. If you killed 60,000 people with your company, and your company, whatever your company made, your company makes peanut butter, and that peanut butter killed 60,000 people, they'd be like, you got to stop making peanut butter.
It's delicious.
Yeah, but with the drug companies, they're like, oh, your experimental drug where you lied about all the tests killed 60,000 people. Well, we're going to need a small portion of the money that you made as a fine, like Vioxx. I forget what the actual numbers were, but it's something along the lines of Vioxx made somewhere around $12 billion. It killed somewhere between 50 and 60,000 people, and they had to pay somewhere in the range of $5 billion in fines. Now,
Yes.
Don't quote me on the numbers, but it's pretty close to that. That's wild.
Yes.
Because that means you are allowed to profit $7 billion and kill 50,000 plus people. That's okay, and you can still go to work.
Yeah, that's a pretty extreme ideology to underwrite a system, and it's the kind of ideology that in the end is going to lose credibility, because when you do replace it for something like peanut butter, it jars with us. We recognise, oh yeah, we are just permitting that. Another thing that was extraordinary is the sudden authority that we were willing to grant to these corporations that had been like the baddies up until 20 minutes before.
Exactly.
We know what Pfizer had done. We know the out-of-court settlements. We know what Johnson & Johnson had done with the alleged carcinogens in baby powder. I mean, stories that sound like they're out of a Bill Hicks joke, actually happening in reality. I heard this thing that guy, Pavlov of the dogs, like he did other experimentation, the results of which were that 20% of people are highly susceptible to hypnosis and similarly highly susceptible to placebos. Like 20% of people, if you give them placebos, it will be effective under the right conditions or whatever, and the same with hypnosis. And 20% of people will not be hypnotized and will not respond to placebos. The middle 60% is where propaganda operates. How many of that middle 60% can you persuade? And I was just astonished that authoritarianism could suddenly be repackaged in this manner. That authoritarianism could tell you that war is a good thing. That authoritarianism can tell you that big pharma is a good thing. That being locked in your home is a good thing. And also all the pieces of evidence sort of fell away from it. Oh no, natural immunity is effective. Oh no, there are adverse events. Oh, there are cases of myocarditis. Oh no, there are every single bit of masks aren't working. All of it just started to fall apart, and somehow they're expecting the eligibility of their authority to have maintained in spite of everything, the edifice cracking open.
And it's so convenient that of all the remedies, that only the ones that are controlled by pharmaceutical companies are the ones that get highlighted. And one of the best pieces of evidence for that is vitamin D. And there was a recent study, see if you can find this. There was a recent study that estimated somewhere in the range of 70% of all hospitalizations and deaths from COVID could have been prevented with vitamin D. I don't know if that's true.
Yeah.
But I remember reading that article going, that is the most insane thing I've ever seen in my life. And when did they know that this was true? Because if they just started handing out vitamin D, it's readily available, so easy to get, so easy to make, so cheap. They just handed out vitamin D to everybody. How many deaths could they have prevented? If that really is the case, that high doses of vitamin D, along with, it's great with magnesium and vitamin K, but if they had educated people about nutrients and about the value of nutrition, the value of supplementation, how many people could have been saved? And how cheaply could that have been done?
when you were talking about health at the beginning of the pandemic, which seems like a pretty obvious and rudimentary thing to talk about, exercise, eat well, I feel like even that is getting framed as a kind of a right-wing narrative now,
which is bizarre.
Look after and love your body. It's extraordinary the way that has altered. I feel that in a way what the pandemic did was it revealed the long con of corporatization of government. That if over the last 50, 60 years government has become increasingly corporatized, that democracy has become increasingly hollowed out and irrelevant, it just took a crisis event to reveal the extent to which that had taken place. Now, the people that are in the outreaches and some of the people in the comments below will talk about, no, the whole thing is staged. It's a global event. The whole thing has been put in place in order to bring about social credit scores and more surveillance and to facilitate lockdowns. And those are the things that are very, very difficult to prove. But what I think you can demonstrate is over the last 50, 60 years, through lobbying and demonstrable means, corporations have had more and more ability to exert influence and downright control government policy, regardless of which party is in power. And then a crisis event took place, and the momentum that carried it through, like governments like control. That's what governments are about, is authority. But big corporations like profit. That's what they're at. And those two things came together. So the solution that was suggested is, well, we can exert control through lockdowns and potentially coming as close as, damn it, to mandating medicines. They can benefit. The indemnity that they were granted, it was a kind of a perfect storm and perfect revelation. We spoke to a person, I don't think you've had him on because I'm sure I would have been aware if you had, this guy, Martin Gurri, who was a CIA operative who wrote a book called The Revolt of the Public. And he said he was a CIA analyst in 2001. And in 2001, there was as much information published that year as in all human history up to that point. And then 2002 it doubled again. And he said when you look at those analytics on a screen, it looks like a tidal wave. And he said that image stayed with him, and he recognized that power was going to alter radically, because if information can be created and exchanged that quickly, centralized authority is going to be massively challenged. Either the way that we govern communities and nations is going to radically alter, with more power being devolved, with more democracy, with more ability to run your own communities, with more feedback and communities, such as the online world is starting to suggest, communities forming around subjects or individuals or figures or ideologies, or, and this seems to be what's happening, centralized authority is going to double down, look for ways to smear dissenters, censor, create new categories like misinformation, disinformation, suddenly find acceptable views of 5-10 years ago are now not acceptable and are banned, tolerance somehow decreasing under the veil of increasing tolerance, literal Orwellianism, them changing the meaning of words, going back, editing books, stuff that we've seen in dystopian sci-fi actually happening. Martin Gurri